This video is brought to you by Established Titles, a project based on a historic Scottish custom that allows you to become a lord or a lady. What kind of project would cause a conservator or any craftsperson to think twice about taking it on? To remember all of the difficulties, trials, and tribulations of the last project of its kind, and forget them conveniently, and say, yes, I will revisit this project. I will take another shot, even in the face of the complexities, difficulties, and challenges that once laid ahead. Well, to say it's a special project is certainly an understatement. And that's exactly what we're dealing with today. Well, this is a doozy.
It's a lot of painting.
Yeah, it is.
Was it originally a triptych?
No, it was originally one panel, one unified piece, but 3 pieces of wood bonded together, 2 seams that have failed over time, multiple splits and checks, missing wood, a long history of old repairs, old varnish, surface grime. It's been poorly clean skinned in the past. This painting kind of has a history of a lot of bad things, lots of interventions, kind of a little bit of everything. And so it's going to require a little bit of everything from us.
Exciting. It is.
No, you're right. It is. It is exciting. I remember back to the last big panel project I did, and I just think how exhausting it was. And so I wonder why would I do this again, knowing how much work it's going to take, how exhausting it's going to be, how difficult it's going to be. But ultimately,
it was a split-second decision.
No, it's because it's exciting, because it's fun, and this painting promises to be no less entertaining and exciting.
So where do you think we start?
Where would you think the first place to start is?
Probably addressing the splits.
So why do you think we would do the structural work first instead of doing the cosmetic stuff, like the cleaning and that?
Well, I feel like if we clean it and we retouch it and then we go in to fix it structurally, that's the more aggressive aspect of conservation, or potentially aggressive. So if something happens and the wood warps or distorts or whatever, you're going to have that hole and you're just going to have to redo all the retouching again.
Yeah, you're right, obviously. There's no point in cleaning the painting right now because there's all this old varnish on it, which to some degree protects the paint layer. And we're going to be handling this painting quite a bit and doing more protection. So starting with the structural stuff is where we have to begin. So knowing that, let's get this painting flipped over so we can see what we're actually dealing with.
Okay. Ooh, nice.
Yeah, to some degree, for a conservator, the most interesting part of a painting is always the back.
Yeah, I'm learning that very quickly.
Yeah, the front can be beautiful or interesting, but it's the back that tells you the story of the painting. So I mentioned that this was originally 3 pieces of wood. It doesn't look like it was from the same tree. The grain is not the same. The saw marks aren't the same. But they bonded 3 pieces of wood together to make one large panel. And if you take a look here, you can see...
Oh yeah, the dowel.
Yep, they're dowels for registration.
They're tiny.
They're tiny, right. So these weren't structural. These weren't holding it together. But what they did was they kept the wood aligned so that when it was bonded together, you had a nice even panel.
Fast forward 400 years.
Yeah, fast forward 400 years and the panel's broken. You can see obviously in the past somebody had tried to glue on a batten, just kind of squirted some...
Is that Elmer's?
It's probably a PVA, Elmer's or something like that, a white glue. Somebody just squirted it on. That was removed because it was most likely unsuccessful. And you can see there are nails from the face.
Well done.
Well done is right. So instead of using adhesive, they used a little bit and then they nailed it through the face of the painting into the batten. And that's
not great.
Existing batten right here, which you can see proved to be wholly unsuccessful because
split.
It just split, right? So we have to get rid of all that stuff, and then we have to think about how we're going to put this panel back together. And that's where it gets really interesting. There is a long history of panel paintings failing and a long history of conservation of panel paintings. And throughout many, many years, hundreds and hundreds of years, styles change, ethos change, ethics change, and what we know about conserving wood and how we choose to do it is always evolving. So there's no set, rote method. Everything has to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. And so we start by looking at some of the facts. So what can you gather about this wood just from looking at it?
It's very old.
You're a quick study, kids.
Yeah. Obviously, there's the two major splits. There's a couple of smaller, but not completely all the way through.
And called checks.
They're called checks, okay. There's some loss here. There's no longer a nice crisp edge on this one, or I think that one. I don't know the type of wood.
Red oak.
Red oak, okay.
And we can tell because I did a little test here, and red oak has open pores, whereas white oak has closed pores.
Does that have any impact on how we approach the conservation?
Well, red oak is generally more prone to expansion and contraction with humidity changes because those pores are open. There is more ability for moisture to go in.
Gotcha.
So this panel is always going to be in flux, unless it's in a permanently stable environment. The other thing is that it's really thin. I mean, look at this. This is, what, 3/8 of an inch thick, you know, give or take, a little less than a centimeter. There's not a lot of room to put dowels or biscuits or dominoes or something else that would help add structural support. So we want to glue it back together. But the method of doing that is complicated.
Right.
And I actually have a couple of examples that I prepared to kind of explain the history and some of the options that we have available to us.
Okay.
Because I think it will be more helpful than just me rambling on. So we have a split piece of wood, right? And if we have a really good clean joint, we can just glue it.
Right.
The glue joint will be the strongest part of the wood. Now on a wood panel like this, if you don't have a good surface, you can put them through a jointer, you can plane them down, you can create a smooth surface.
Okay.
And then you get a great glue joint.
But
the problem is that we have paint on one side,
Right.
Artist's image. So we can't just run this through a table saw, take off a 1/16 of an inch and make it better, unless we can. Now, historically, that has been the case. Conservators have said, this edge is so compromised, we have to reduce it in order to save the painting. Again, save the image, we have to consume some of the wood and some of the image. And what they've done, they have taken a filler piece equal to the amount of wood that they've removed.
Is it the same material?
Same wood,
Okay.
right? Same grain, as much as they can, and put it in. So now you have two really clean glue joints, and you have a filler that makes up the difference of the material that you removed. Removing wood isn't the end of the world, but removing painted wood is not something that we ever want to do. So this, I would say, would be kind of last resort.
Okay.
Certainly an option, but not one that I am inclined to pursue as a first choice. Now, the other option is to create a dado and to take the panel and to remove some of the mass while leaving as much as possible where the painted surface is. Now, this plywood is thicker than this panel, so it's not a one-to-one comparison, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
And what we're doing effectively is creating a channel whereby we can align the joint as best as possible. It may not be perfect because there's some chips and frayed wood, but align it as best as possible, then create a recess for effectively like a Dutchman or an inlay, which would run the entire length of the grain and give a lot more surface area for glue. In fact, really, it almost triples the amount of surface area than a standard butt joint. And that creates an incredibly strong bond.
Okay.
Now, I reached out to some wood conservators, furniture conservators, and people who know more about wood than I do. And I consulted the Getty Conservation Institute's massive 6-part tome on panel paintings. It's really remarkable. It's over 1,000 pages of research on panel paintings. And the thing that struck me is that this would create an incredibly strong joint, but it also creates an incredibly weak spot. And that's right here, right at this corner. Because what you'll end up having is a weak spot all along the panel. And this wood, even if we get the same wood and a similar grain structure, it's going to move at a slightly different rate than the original.
Right.
And so when these move, what you're going to have is all of that tension is going to be right along this little edge.
Yep.
And that's where you're going to get a crack.
And then instead of one, you'll have two.
Instead of one, you have two. Right, we've solved this one, but we potentially have two more. Alternatively, what may happen is over multiple expansion-contraction cycles, this dado may telegraph to the front. And we've seen that in the past where thin panels have had butterflies inlaid, and then on the front of the panel, you see the butterfly. Because again, the wood moves at different rates and it starts to press forward or recede back. So this, again, is an option. It doesn't revolve around removing some of the painted wood, just the back of the wood. But I'm not fully comfortable with it because in solving one problem, we've created two potential weak spots.
Right.
And that's just not a good way to be. An option, but I think this one is less appealing, at least for me. Now, the third option comes out of some research that I did and some techniques that were pioneered in Italy in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, so on and so forth. And instead of removing a dado, you create a bevel, you remove a wedge. Yeah. And what that does is it still allows a recess for a wedge-shaped Dutchman to inlay.
Cool.
So you get the amplification of the glue surface that you would with the rectangular dado. Right? You have more glue surface here than you do with a butt joint, which is what creates a strong joint. But you haven't created any hard corners here that are susceptible to failure. You've created a gradual transition.
Yeah.
And if this wood moves, because there's more mass at the back than there is at the front, when it moves, the expansion at this edge is going to be more than this edge. So if it moves, I'm going to exaggerate here, it's going to go like that. It's basically created a hinge point on the front. So what we would have is the back of the panel expanding. It would become concave, which isn't great, but it eventually would go back to being flat, and we wouldn't get an opening or separation on the front of the painting. And this also allows us to not remove any of the painted surface. So this is the one that I am most inclined to pursue.
Yeah, I think that's a really elegant solution.
Elegant, but not easy.
No, of course not. It never is.
What potential issues do you see as arising?
You got to get the angle right. That's one. If you don't plane it out correctly, and you're still trying to do that on one, a very old piece of wood, and two, a very thin piece of wood.
And a painting.
And a painting.
So it's not like I can just run this through the table saw and set the bevel at 45 degrees and just zip, zip. I mean, making this is easy. This is the table saw. But how we do this is going to be tricky. Hand plane, chisels, power tools, jigs, templates. I don't know. This we'll have to brainstorm and figure out. It's not impossible, but...
it's a lot of forethought.
Well, yeah. I mean, anytime you're taking on a project of this complexity, you have to. You have to spend a lot of time choreographing out everything you're doing, planning it out, so that you don't end up in a moment of panic where the glue is already spread, but something isn't right, because you only get one shot. Oh, and then we have to think about the adhesives and how we're going to approach those. And that's all before we even start to think about cleaning the painting and dealing with all of the losses and retouching and framing and all of this stuff. So suffice it to say, I think we have our work cut out for us. But it actually doesn't start with the panel. It starts with more research. So I want to look into adhesives. I want you to do a little bit of research into oak and the movement of the wood. And then we'll come back and we'll share what we've discovered and see which of these approaches is actually going to be the best, and then start to formulate a plan for how we're going to implement it.
Okay.
So, on to the books.
Let's go.
And here we have it, a painting that's nearly 575 years old, that's seen some better days, and is about to get a new lease on life. All right, Kit, we have a lot of work to do ahead of us to get this painting put back together, so we gotta get to it.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's super cool.
It is. In fact, the owners had it authenticated, and it turns out it's by a Flemish old master from 1540 named Peter Koch van Elst. So it's a pretty important painting.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like what kind of people have access to this?
Not me. I mean, I'm a commoner over
Yeah.
here.
I feel like you need to be some sort of royalty, like a lord or lady, to be in the same room as this painting.
Yeah, well, it's funny you should mention that, Kit, because thanks to established titles, today you are Lady Kit.
I've always been a lady.
I have created a monster. In fact, it even says right here, henceforth in perpetuity, you shall be known by the style and title of lady.
So I'm a lady of Scotland now?
You are a lady.
You realize I have to talk in this accent forever?
I expect nothing else.
And you will be referring to me as her ladyship from now on? Yeah.
Darn.
For Scotland!
It's a really cool and simple process. Simply log on to the Established Titles website, decide if you want to be a lord or lady or both, decide how much land you'd like to purchase, and then your proclamation will be on its way. And each plot comes with a unique number and GPS coordinates, so you can see it or even go there if you wanted. And because all the plots are assigned sequentially, if you, my viewers, decide to become a lord or lady, the cool thing is you'll be next to another Baumgartner restoration fan. And aside from being a cool gift and a novel idea that allows you to call yourself a lord or lady, I mean, you can, even on your airline tickets. This is for a good cause too. Established Titles has partnered with Trees for the Future, and thus far, over the duration, they've planted over 2 million trees around the world. It's a pretty cool gift, just ask Kit. Established Titles is actually running a massive sale right now, plus if you use the code Baumgartner, you get an additional 10% off. So head over to establishedtitles.com/Baumgartner to get your gifts, become a lord or lady, and help out the environment a little bit. The first step for the lady, I cannot believe that I did that. The first step for Lady Kit and I in the conservation of this painting is to start removing stuff. And that's usually where any project starts. But in this case, we're not removing a painting from a frame. We're removing things from the painting. During many previous conservation attempts, this painting was nailed and glued to backing support structures that have all since failed. And we have to start undoing all of that so that we can, well, start putting it back together. When I mentioned nailed, I meant it, nailed, through the face of the painting to the backing. And so we have to get all of these rusted nails out. And some of them come out with a hammer tap, some of them need pliers, and some of them we really have to work to get out. But they all need to come out because they have no business there. Not only because they will make repairing this painting exponentially more difficult, but because they are going to continue to deteriorate. The metal will continue to rust, and eventually, if we don't remove them, it'll be a problem later on. And even though that may be easier in the interim, I'm not comfortable leaving a time bomb for the next conservator. Now in this case, I have to use a little nail punch to press out the nail and then pull it out the face. I was hoping that I could just pull it out, but it doesn't look like it's going to yield. So I'll put down a piece of blotter paper and I'll take a little pliers or wire snip and pull it out. Now some of these are really embedded in there, and there's no way of getting them out without causing some ancillary damage. It's nothing that I'm delighted about or that I'm trying to do, but it is so brittle and so well bonded that this really is the only way to get it out. And you can see little chips of paint are coming off, but unfortunately that's a problem that was created by whomever chose to nail the painting in the face, and I just have to deal with the consequences of that problem. And you can see Kit is using quite a bit of force to get that little nail out. This one doesn't have any access from the back, so we can't simply tap it out, so we have to go from the face. Again, decisions that were made by the person before us are now things we have to clean up in our studio. And this really is one of those lessons of conservation. Sometimes we don't have control over what we get or how we fix it. We just have to approach it from a fresh viewpoint and try to make the best of a lousy situation. Now, why somebody would choose to nail through the painting to a little batten on the back or piece of wood to stabilize it is beyond me. Certainly, there are many other ways if you are trying to stabilize a piece of wood, and in no universe, in no textbook, in no workshop, never would it be okay to nail through the face. So it's pretty clear that whoever did this was A, not a conservator, B, likely not somebody with a lot of experience in art, and C, somebody with absolutely no sensitivity to materials and consequences of their actions. In any event, as Kit works to remove some of the remaining nails, I'm going to turn my attention to the edge of the board. This board was not only nailed, but it was glued back together, at least several times with multiple types of glue. And in order for us to put it back together the right way, we have to get all of that old stuff off. And so I'm going to take a wire brush and start to see if I can work off some of this old glue, which I suspect is hide glue or maybe even rabbit skin glue. If I'm lucky, it will just flake off. And some of it does, but it looks like I'm going to have to do a little bit more work. So I'll take a scalpel and I'll slowly glide across the surface, just trying to remove the glue. I'm not looking to plane down or shave off any of the wood. That's not something that we do. I just want to get all of this glue off. And if I can get it off without adding any moisture to reactivate it, that's better. Because if I reactivate it, it will start to penetrate into the wood and then become a problem later on. So in its deterioration, it's actually working in my favor. But it does take work. Even though some of it comes off really easily, some of it doesn't. And along the way, I find an old dowel registration pin. And this was used when the panel was created to make sure that the individual panels lined up and effectively held together. Now, it was cut or broke in some point in the past, so I'm not going to reuse it. As I clean this edge, I am happy to find that it's not terribly deteriorated, but there are some areas that have been compromised. Right here, for example, you can see that the edge has split. And so this is going to become a problem when we do try to bond it back together because the wood has already been compromised. Just another thing that we will have to address before we can actually address the thing we want to address. So again, more slow, methodical work, scraping off all of this glue, some of the dust and dirt. Here there's some old paint that was forced in there. There's a little bit of old wax. There's fill-in material. There's all sorts of stuff, kind of a history of failed attempts. And we just need to get all of it off because any successful joint is dependent upon a clean wood surface bonding with another clean wood surface by way of an adhesive. And if that surface is compromised, we're not going to get a good joint. But with an initial pass, it looks pretty good. The next thing that I need to remove is what appears to be a white glue or PVA glue, and it was just kind of squirted on the back. You can see that this area I'm removing wasn't actually in contact with whatever was glued to the back of this board. The glue never oozed out. This was a void. This actually works in my favor because I can slice under it and lift it off. You can see just in front and back or to the left and right of the glue puddle that I'm removing, the glue was bonded into the wood. It was rubbed in, and I can't remove that without sanding or scraping or planing, and I'm not interested in doing that. I don't want to remove any of the wood if I don't have to, and for an area like this where it's just a little bit of glue on the wood, it's fine if I leave it. I will make multiple passes over the panel with a stiff wire brush to release any of that extra dust and dirt, oxidation, glue, whatever I can get off. I want to try to get this panel as clean as possible, not only because it makes it easier to work with, but also because I don't want to return it in a dirty state. Part of what I'm doing here is conserving the whole piece, not just the front, and part of that is cleaning the back. So you can see a lot of grime and dirt and dust and oxidized wood is coming off. And I know it looks really rough because the painting is face down, but there's a lot of varnish on that painting protecting it. And I'm going to use this vacuum with a HEPA filter to suck up all of that dust because I don't want it to end up in my lungs or on my shirt or all over the studio. And again, I want a clean painting. And you see, this vacuum does quite a good job. It's remarkable how much of the wood we can actually see when we've taken off all the grime. So with the back all addressed and all of the little nails and stuff removed, Kit and I can go to the back half of the studio where we can start to think about structural repairs. Now I'm placing the painting into my vice grip on my little wood bench, and I'm using some felt pads to buffer the piece of MDF that I'm clamping in with it. Now this little clamp is not very big. In fact, it's barely adequate for what I'm doing, but I'm not going to be working the wood too much. This is just mostly to hold it in a vertical position. What I am going to be doing is working the area where there's been a big chunk taken out of the wood. I'm going to have to put an inlay here, and what I want is a smooth, even surface. But this right here is not smooth or even. It's chunked up, it's varied, it's irregular. And that means that it's going to be really hard to make a good glue joint, let alone to cut a piece of wood that's going to fit. So once I've shaped it and it's smooth and even, and I haven't removed any of the paint, I've just removed excess wood, I can take a new piece of red oak and I can go ahead and trace the area and create that inlay. I do want to try to get it as accurate as possible, but I do have a little bit of wiggle room. I can always sand or plane or use a chisel to shape it. But the closer I get on the first pass, the easier it is going to be on the second or third. Now this is where power tools are really handy, and having a bandsaw makes this quick work. I used to have to do this with a handsaw, and it wasn't terribly difficult, particularly for a small piece like this. But the bandsaw makes it very, very simple and very easy. And boom, just like that, I have it trimmed. Now I am going to trim also the depth so that it is the same as the panel and has a similar curvature. Again, I can shape all of this later on, but if I get close enough on the first pass, it's easier for me as I go forward. I'm going to be using hide glue here to bond this piece of wood to the original panel. And I'm going to be using hide glue here because it is reversible. If ever this needs to come out, it can, but also because it gives me a little bit of flexibility. It has a good open time, so I can work this. And also, as I go forward, well, you'll see as I go forward what I mean and why I decided to use hide glue. I don't want to give you all the secrets away right away. And then all I have to do is clamp it up. Now I decided to use hand clamps here instead of setting up the clamping table or clampinator, partially as a demonstration of just how much more complicated and how much more effort it takes to hand clamp something when you don't have a complex clamping system. So this is me and Kit working. That's 4 hands, 2 clamps, a couple of battens to protect the wood, and then some more clamps to hold it in place. And now it's Kit's turn to try the inlay process. I gave her the really complicated one, not on purpose. I guess it was just an accident. Or maybe it wasn't. Just like I did, she's going to trace the opening onto the piece of wood, and then she's going to take it over to the bandsaw and cut it out. And Kit looks surprisingly excited to use the bandsaw. I'm kind of worried. Don't worry, no fingers were lost and everything goes according to plan. And just like I did, Kit's going to cut it out and get that piece to fit. And she did a fantastic job. Cutting a really complicated shape out like that is really hard, and there are some gaps, but that's okay because this is just to provide a surface for the fill-in medium and the retouching. This is not really all that structural, and you will see what I mean by that when I get to that point. But for right now, again, using hide glue and placing it on both surfaces, ample amounts in fact, we can ensure that we have a really good glue joint. If any of this hide glue squeezes out, and it will, that indicates we have a good bond, and also we can clean it up later on. It is hide glue, so it is responsive to water, and it cleans up pretty easily. Again, clamping it is a little bit more difficult, even though there are 2 of us, but we finally do manage to get it clamped. And now the painting will have to sit for a day or 2 as this glue dries, before we can start on some really fun structural work next time.